ninjas. What's crackin'? Movie skippers.
What's up, movie skippers? Welcome to Movie Recaps Daily. Today, I'm going to explain the movie Beasts of No Nation. A tragic war story about a boy who loses his family and becomes a child soldier in an endless war. So, buckle your seatbelts and let's get started. The movie opens on some children playing football on an abandoned playground. A boy named Agu watches with his friend. Agu narrates in the background. He says his country is at war and they can no longer go to school. They now have to find ways to have fun. Later, Agu and the children try to sell a television frame to a security guard, but he sends them away. We see military tanks and soldiers blocking a street. They are the Eco Mod, and Agu says they are there to protect them from the coming rebels and the coming war. The children are eventually able to sell the television frame to a Nigerian soldier in exchange for packs of food. We are at Agu's house now. His mom is making him a meal. Agu's father was a teacher before the war, but now provides shelter for refugees on his land. Agu pees on his older brother, and he playfully punishes him for it. Later that day, the family attends a local church. They rejoice and dance. The scene changes, and this time Agu, his friend, and his older brother block a road with a tree branch to beg passing drivers for money. A crazy old woman sees what they are doing, curses them, and accuses them of stealing her land to house refugees. Agu and his brother become upset. Later that night, Agu's older brother questions their father about the old woman's accusations. Their father says the old woman is lying. Agu's family eat and have a good laugh together when their younger sister farts. Moments later, the power in their house and the entire community goes out. The next day, while Agu and his older brother are fetching water, they see the girl from the church. Agu's older brother flexes his muscles and tells his brother that she will fall in love with him. Later that day, the Eco-Mod soldiers enter the village with their armored tanks and instruct the villagers to pack their loads and leave because the rebels are on their way. However, at a community meeting, the village chief insists that they cannot leave the village because they have to protect it. Agu's father, along with the men of the village, all agree to protect their village. That night, Agu listens to his father and mother argue. His mother wants the family to leave for the capital together, but his father wants her to leave for the city with Agu and his sister. The next day, Agu's father takes them to a rowdy park. As people struggle to get into a car bound for the capital, Agu's father tries to get Agu, and his mom into the vehicle, but the driver will only allow his mother and younger sister. Agu struggles, weeps, and runs after the car as he watches them leave without him. His brother consoles him. Then we hear Agu say, "This is how it started." A storm begins while Agu is having a meal with his father and older brother. He shuts the windows. The next time we see him, Agu is running through an abandoned market. Gunshots rend the air and people lie flat out of fear. Agu, his father, brother, and some villagers hide in a dark store. The villagers are terrified. One person wants to run out, but Agu's father advises against it. He watches through a small hole in the door as the government military kills all the rebels, but when a tank shoots a shell at their store, the frightened villager runs out and is killed by the government soldiers. The remaining villagers, along with Agu, are lined on their knees in front of a captain from the government military, who introduces themselves as the Armed Forces of the National Reformation Council, NRC. Agu's father tells the captain that they are villagers, but he accuses them of being rebels. He brings the crazy old woman to confirm their identity, but the woman says she's never seen them before. The captain orders his soldiers to execute them, but Agu escapes with his older brother. The soldiers murder Agu's father and the rest of the villagers in cold blood. Agu's older brother gets shot by the soldiers, but Agu once again escapes into the forest. We see smoke rising from his village in the background. The day turns into night and Agu wanders through the forest before breaking down in tears. He stumbles on an abandoned hut and finds some food in a sack. He tries and fails to start a fire to cook food for himself. Later, we see him eating some leaves, which he ends up vomiting. Then his eyes lock on a boy painted in white spots and dressed in leaves. The boy starts running. Before Agu can catch up to him, he is gone. Agu wanders into the middle of a firefight. When he tries to escape, he is knocked out. Most of the fighters are children and teenagers with rifles. They tie Agu up and bring him before their Commandant. The Commandant is a bearded, tough-looking middle-aged man. He asks a little boy named Streka who Agu is and tells the soldiers to untie him. The Commandant calls for another soldier, a teenager named 2IC, and asks who Agu is. 2IC responds that Agu is just a boy, but the Commandant says Agu is not just a boy. Agu stares at the Commandant with disgust. The Commandant says he has hands that can strangle and fingers that can pull triggers. He is not just a boy. Then the Commandant realizes that Agu has the palms of a baby, so asks him what he's doing so far from home. Agu tells him the government army killed his father and brother. The Commandant decides to take Agu under his wings and train him to become a soldier so he can avenge the death of his father. Agu and some other hostages carry ammunition for them through the forest to their base. 2IC introduces Agu and the young hostages to their new status. They are the NDF, he says, and if they are going to be a part of them, they must be initiated. 2IC hands Agu to a boy soldier for training. Later, when the underage battalion are eating, a hungry Agu requests for food from a soldier named Preacher, who responds by laughing and punishing him. The Commandant calls for Streka, and Agu watches as he suspiciously walks into the Commandant's hut. The new soldiers are trained how to carry guns and shoot. They are also fed propaganda by 2IC, who tells them that the Commandant and his NDF army have been fighting the NRC ever since they took advantage of the war and seized power to install a political party called the UPC. Later, the Commandant addresses his little army of rebel soldiers. He tells them they are fighting to reclaim their freedom. He tells them that they are his family. His words are charismatic enough to strike a chord in Agu, who chants after his Commandant. Agu and the new soldiers are taken through the final stages of the initiation. They are placed on burning wood, beaten, incised with sharp blades, and placed in shallow graves. When the ritual is over, Agu emerges as a soldier. You can see the determination on his face. He is lined up with other new soldiers and they are shot at, but the bullets don't hurt them. The Commandant informs them that the spirits have blessed them and that they are invisible to the enemies. They dance in celebration. Later, they burn their makeshift huts as they leave. We hear the Commandant pledge his allegiance to a superior officer on the phone who calls him his freedom fighter and promises him supplies as they all make their way through the forest to their next base. The child soldiers ambush a bridge. Under the bridge, Agu watches as the children smoke cigarettes and sniff gunpowder. Preacher instructs Agu to keep quiet at all times, even if a snake bites him. Then an enemy convoy approaches the bridge. The children soldiers attack it with RPGs and assault rifles. Agu is sent to get ammo, but the battle is over. A survivor is brought to the Commandant. He begs and says he is an engineering student working on the bridge, not a soldier. The Commandant instructs Agu to kill the man with a machete, but Agu can't bring himself to kill the man. The Commandant tells him that the man is part of the people that killed his father, and this is when Agu buries the machete in the man's head. Streka joins him, and together they butcher the man in a bloody mess. 2IC hands him a gun, and Agu throws up in disgust. Later, Streka hands him some boots and clothes. Agu asks him if he likes the war, but Streka can't respond, so he shakes his head. Agu tells him he is thinking of his mom. They play together and become friends. Later that night, as they sit by a fireside with their Commandant, some women ask for help to reclaim their village from the other armed forces. The Commandant agrees to help them. The village is under heavy gunfire. The Commandant watches through a small monocular from a distance. Agu almost gets killed while bending to pick up a bullet casing. The Commandant radios 2IC. He is in the middle of the firefight. He asks him if he can take the village, but 2IC says it is difficult and that some of the boys are injured. But the Commandant can't be bothered. He tells them to keep on fighting. He calls Streka and Agu forward, intending to show them how to use the monocular. Agu uses it and sees the boys fighting in the village, but when it is Streka's turn, the Commandant takes it away. Streka is hurt. They launch a cannon and advance into the villages. There is more bloodshed and fighting. As the Commandant and remaining soldiers march triumphantly, 2IC watches on with disappointment. Later that night, as the living soldiers rummage through the pockets of their dead colleagues, Agu says he now knows the smell of the dead. Agu finds something in the pockets of a dead soldier and brings it to Strika. Strika takes him to the Commandant, who is speaking to his Supreme Commander on the phone. The Supreme Commander instructs him to prepare 2IC to take over. He is unhappy about the instructions, but the Supreme Commander promises the Commandant that he will be made a general. Agu smiles in adoration as the Commandant opens his new find. The Commandant tells him that he reminds him of when he was a small boy. He also promises him that after their next mission, he will have a chance to see his mother. Then he invites him into a room. The Commandant has taken a liking to Agu. He gives him a cloth that has special protective charms and tells him to keep it a secret from the others. After that, he sniffs some gunpowder and sexually assaults Agu. Agu stumbles out, hurt. Strika immediately understands what has happened. Strika consoles him as Agu deals with the shock. The next morning, Preacher notices Agu's mood and gives him morale booster, gunpowder. Agu gets high on it. Meanwhile, the Commandant prepares them for their next mission. On their way, some photojournalists in a bus take pictures of them as Agu watches. As they advance into the next town, the gunpowder makes Agu hallucinate. Civilians fall under the gunfire in every direction. Agu and a couple of others raid a house. They discover a woman and her daughter in a cupboard. Agu thinks it is his mother and he hugs her, but when the drug wears off, he realizes she isn't. Strika kills her daughter and Preacher rapes the woman. Agu is shaken. He goes to a corner and thinks about what they are doing. Then he returns to shoot the woman in the head. The town chiefs are rounded up and stuffed with grenades. The Commandant, Agu, and Strika watch coldly. 2IC brings a message from the Supreme Commander. They have been summoned. When 2IC questions him, he deflects the question as the town chiefs explode in the background. There is an injured soldier on the floor. The Commandant does nothing to save him. They leave the town and head for the Supreme Commander. At the Supreme Commander's HQ, they are welcomed by the deputy, who orders them to drop their weapons outside. They are ushered to a waiting room where an Asian expat is sitting. After a moment, the expat is taken in to see the Supreme Commander while they are kept waiting. Day turns into night and the Commandant is still waiting. Some of his soldiers have slept off. Another expat is attended to and the Commandant loses it. He snaps at the deputy, who apologizes and invites them into a more comfortable waiting room. They are kept waiting once again. This time, the Commandant sleeps off too. He is woken up by the deputy in the morning and taken to the Supreme Commander, who is pleased to see them. He has a meeting with 2IC and the Commandant while the soldiers feast. The Commandant asks why the Supreme Commander made him wait and why they are not taking the capital. The Commandant replies, "The world is becoming more aware of their war." When the Commandant asks if he is still going to be made general, the Supreme Commander says no. He hands over the Commandant's battalion to 2IC and demotes the Commandant to Deputy Chief of Security. The Commandant orders 2IC to leave. The Commandant asks why he is being demoted and when he'll get paid, but the Supreme Commander reminds him that he is a soldier and that his only duty is obedience. The Commandant requests for one more night with his men and takes 2IC along with the rest of the battalion to a bar. 2IC wants to leave, but the Commandant insists he stays. He gives the owner of the bar a suspicious look before asking her to bring more women for 2IC and the rest of the battalion. The men drop their guns with Strika and Agu as they go inside with their women. Moments later, we hear a gunshot from within. Agu grabs his gun. A wounded 2IC is carried out by his men. The Commandant runs out and screams who did this. 2IC says, "You did this," referring to the Commandant, but he blames the lady he was with and they kill both women. They rush out of the bar with 2IC and the rest of the women. Agu sniffs in some gunpowder, then approaches a dying 2IC who tells him that all their fighting was for nothing. The Commandant calls for Agu, who tells him that he doesn't know who to trust. Agu informs him that 2IC is dead. They hold a funeral for him where the Commandant declares the Supreme Commandant as their new enemy. As they leave their hideout, Agu begins to think about the unending nature of their war. Later that night, they sleep in the forest and are bombed. Members of the battalion carry the wounded, calling out for the medic only to find that he is also dead. The Commandant stares in anger at the corpses. Agu reasons that after the war, he won't be able to go back to being a child. The surviving members of the battalion starve. Agu and Streka feed on grasshoppers. They hear gunshots, so they have to keep moving. The Commandant appoints Preacher as the new 2IC. However, Streka refuses to move an inch. Agu discovers he has been shot. Agu carries Streka on his back and they move through the forest. After some distance, Agu hears a voice singing and tells Streka it reminds him of his mother. But Streka doesn't respond. Streka is dead. The children surround his body as Agu tries to revive him. They cover his body with palm fronds and walk away. Later, the Preacher asks Agu to get him bullets. As Agu searches for bullets, he calls on his mother because he feels God isn't listening to him anymore. The soldiers around him are sick and dying. The Commandant has the healthy ones digging for gold, but they can't even find clean water. Bodies are getting buried. Agu informs the Commandant that there are no bullets. He responds by saying, "This isn't the way things were supposed to turn out." He says he will always protect Agu because he is his son and a son always protects his father. Just then, the Preacher confronts the Commandant and tells him that he is leaving because there are no bullets to kill the enemy. Everyone agrees. The Commandant berates them. Preacher points his gun at the Commandant. Agu points his gun at the Commandant. The Commandant dares him to shoot. Agu says he wants to surrender. The Commandant is disappointed and lets them leave. They surrender to the eco-mod who disarm them. Agu sees the Nigerian soldier that he sold the television frame to. They are taken away. Agu wakes up in a missionary home that overlooks an ocean. The living conditions are way better. The children are happy and the food is good. But Agu suffers from PTSD, withdrawal symptoms, and sleepless nights. Preacher starts a small riot with the other kids and they burn furniture. Later, Preacher tries to convince Agu to leave with him, but he refuses. When Agu is taken in for therapy with a woman called Amy, he refuses to open up, but she is patient with him. He eventually tells her that he feels like a beast, but all he wants is to be happy in this life. Moments later, we see him join some other kids as they play ball in the ocean. And that is the end of Beasts of No Nation. Congratulations, you are now a movie?
Scare!